In today's quest, we navigate the intricate web of perspective and persuasion. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome. This is the 7th edition of the SASI debate, proudly brought to you by SAYWHAT and supported by the Swedish Embassy in Zimbabwe. My name is Mrs. Jones, and I am your debate mistress. Joining me today in studio are 4 prestigious universities. Teams, please make yourselves known, starting from podium 1 all the way to podium 4.
My name is Tendai Sarai from Marondera University of Agricultural Sciences and Technology.
My name is Polite from Marondera University, and I'm the Prime Minister.
My name is Chelsea William. I'm from GSU.
My name is Andrew from Gwanda State University.
My name is Tawalenkois Marslin Ngube from Lupane State University. With me is the tall guy, Mr. Mvigeli Ndlovu.
My name is Mpatso Tanganyika from Women's University in Africa.
My name is Michelle Gururu from Women's University in Africa.
Now that we are well acquainted, welcome aboard. Let the games begin. This debate will follow the British parliamentary style. The rules are, each participant will be given exactly 4 minutes to present their case. Points of information are allowed. However, if your POI has been rejected, you have to wait for exactly 30 seconds before requesting for a second opportunity. With that being said, the motion reads, this House prefers a world where the dominant norm is one where it is acceptable to talk about sex, sexual interest, and advances with adults in all contexts. That is, strangers, friends, and work, etc. This House prefers a world where dominant is norm. This House prefers a world where the dominant norm is where one is acceptable to talk about sex, sexual interest, and advances with adults in all contexts. That is, strangers, friends, work, etc. The motion has been stated. Prime Minister, the ball is now in your court.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear opponents, for too long, society has shrouded sex, sexual interest, and sexual advances. I think it's high time to break free from these shackles. With these statements, this House prefers a world where the dominant norm is where it is acceptable to talk about sex, sexual interest, and sexual advances in all contexts, that is, strangers, work, friends. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine a world where young adults can freely discuss their sexual interests, their sexual advances without fear of being stigmatized or being judged. Imagine a world where talking about sex is no longer a whisper or a taboo, but is actually a topic of empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, let us normalize the discussion of sex, sexual advances, sexual interest, and create a society that is inclusive and is not stigmatizing. Also, breaking taboos around sex helps to destigmatize diverse sexual orientations, identities, and practices. Ladies and gentlemen, by accepting that a world where it is a norm to talk about sex, we are actually increasing our societal, economic, religious, and political well-being of people, particularly young adults. Ladies and gentlemen, normalizing an education on sex provides open conversations about sex, which can lead to greater understanding and normalization of sexual reproductive health rights. Ladies and gentlemen, This is in line with the UNESCO 2018, which states that STIs can also be prevented by having an open discussion about sex. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that normalizing sex talk and also sexual advances makes expression of sexual interest very easy to young adults. Ladies and gentlemen, this will help them in actually making an informed decision when it comes to their sexual life. Ladies and gentlemen, we are still in support of the statement that sexual talk should be a topic of empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, what do I mean by empowerment? If we normalize talking about sex, we're actually giving people, particularly young adults, more information on their sexual reproductive health rights. That is, they are aware of what is happening around them. They are fully aware of the consequences that they will face if they are to have sexual activities. Ladies and gentlemen, we also believe that taboos around sex, which have been the common in the past, have led to many things such as stigmatization. We prefer a world where talking about sex is not something that will make people stigmatize against you, but is actually free for discussion. People can talk freely. It might be in the workplace, it might be with strangers, it might even be at house with family. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that normalizing talking about sex can have a greater impact on society. That is, individuals express themselves fully in terms of matters that actually affect them. Ladies and gentlemen, we divert from the policy that sex should be something which is a taboo, because in the past years we have seen that not talking about sex has had greater impacts on people. So we believe that as society we should adopt a norm where it is acceptable to talk about sex in all concepts of life. With this, I thank you.
And that was the Prime Minister representing the opening government. Up next, we have the Leader of Opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, as opposition, we are opposing the motion that says this House prefers a world where the dominant norm is where it is acceptable to talking about sex. We are saying where sex is needed, in as much as sex it's a need to talk about sex, in as much as we need to talk about it, making it a dominant norm is not the way. Because making it a dominant norm has more disadvantages than it has advantages. When we look at this topic, we find out that it goes on to say, to talk about sex, sexual interests, and advances. When we talk about sexual interests, we're talking about if I feel sexually attracted to you. This motion then allows me to just attack you and tell you I want you outside, where I don't care where you are. Are you in class? Are you at work? I will just tell you what I want because this motion says so. And that is not the way. Our argument stands like this. Talking about sex is okay, but making it a dominant norm is not the way. Dominant norms, conversations that are talked about every day, it's football, we're talking food, we're talking school. Sex is not one of those. And then, talking about some of the points that they raised, they also talked about talking to strangers, talking about this at work, talking about this with friends. You cannot meet a stranger and start talking about how you lost your virginity. We do not care. We have other things to do. And that diminishes your respect. You lose your self-respect because you feel like talking about sex. So what we're saying is we should talk about sex because the young people should know, the youth should know. But normalizing the conversation is not the way. So, okay, if we don't normalize the conversation, what do? We can have other solutions like promoting these. We have awareness campaigns. We have better solutions than talking about it every day. Promoting the motion that says normalizing this conversation will result in more harm. What am I saying about this? We have to talk about boundaries. Everyone has boundaries. Everyone has a personal proxemics. And you having the right to talk about your sexuality to me, even when I don't want it, would be violating my rights, which is why we are opposing this moment. Open conversations can also harm the people who talk about it. What am I saying here? When you talk about your sex to me, can I give an example? To me, when a girl comes and tells me that they love sex, I'm going to see a war. Excuse my language, but the truth is we cannot have that happening to girls. Girls cannot lose their respect because they are allowed to talk about sex. We have potential for harassment. Remember, harassment is more defined by the one who is harassed more than the harasser. So to me, who is talking about it because it's normal, it's okay. But to the lady who is listening, it's not okay. I can't be going around talking about people's bums when they don't want it. And that is just the truth. This motion is wrong in all concepts. We are going to have more unwanted pregnancies. Talking about sex will make it something that is acceptable to just have sex whenever you want. You think you like someone, you go, you ask for sex, you get it. And that will result in more unwanted pregnancies. Winky D talked about it. People are suffering out there because of unwanted pregnancies. And by talking about this, we will promote such cases. We're going to have an increase in STIs. I do not see how talking about sex will reduce them because it is only going to allow people to have sex more often because they're allowed to talk about it. And one most important point is the disrespect that your parents are going to have. The motion speaks about talking to adults. Which are the first adults in my circle? I'm talking about my mother, my father. You see me going to tell my mother that I am feeling horny. That is not acceptable. My mother deserves her respect and she cannot lose it because I want to talk about sex. A father cannot lose respect from her girls because the girl wants to start having sex. While it is okay to talk about sex, we cannot make it a normal conversation. We have normal conversations and it's been working. It's been working. We see Zimbabwe, people are getting married. Marriages are surviving, but most marriages are falling because people lost their virginity and you only lose your virginity when you're allowed to talk about it. So it's working. We can stay with it. We don't have to normalize it. Thank you.
And that was the leader of opposition stating his case. Now we'll leave the floor open to the Deputy Prime Minister.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I was listening to the opposition speaker saying, I have noted that they were only focusing on sexual intercourse, but rather with the motion that this house promotes a world where it is dominant to talk, where it is a norm to talk about sexual interests and sex advances. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not only focusing on sexual intercourse, we are focusing on sexual expression, we are focusing on sexual rights, we are focusing on age of consent, as well as sexual reproductive health, ladies and gentlemen. What am I saying, ladies and gentlemen? Reiterating that advocating for age of discussion about sex and interest does not imply disregarding boundaries, as the opposition side is said. They talk about feelings, unwanted pregnancies, and feelings. Like I have said in the opening, we are not only focusing about sexual intercourse, but sexual expression in its wholeness. Open communication promotes sexual education. Reduces stigma, and empowers individuals to navigate relationships and assert their boundaries affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the issues of sexual expression where we have LGBTs, those people who express themselves as lesbians or gays and other sexual expression. Ladies and gentlemen, talking about this and normalizing this talk will capacitate the individuals to fit into the society, because they will know that it is acceptable and how to navigate through that.
POI.
Rejected. Normalizing these discussions, ladies and gentlemen, in a respect and informal manner contributes to a more conclusive and understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, we talk about age of consent. For example, if I was a parent, I would tell my child that the age of consent for sex is 18 and above. Ladies and gentlemen, so anyone who wants to come and express sexual interest to that child, they are able to know that this is unacceptable, rejected. this is unacceptable and they'll be able to stand for themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, we talk about sexual rights. We talk about sexual rights where we capacitate boys and girls so that they know their rights about in as much as sex is concerned. We also talk about sexual reproductive health. Talking about sex, for example, to girls, they will be able to know that at such an age they are going to reach menstrual cycle. They will be prepared to deal with that. So, ladies and gentlemen, talking about sex in all its context is good to promote these things, ladies and gentlemen. We talk about normalizing discussions about sex and can promote a culture of consent where individuals feel comfortable setting and respecting boundaries, contrary to what the opposition side has said. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to focus on things that matter, like sex and its awareness. With this, I think.
And that was the Deputy Prime Minister representing the opening government. Now we'll leave the floor open to the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
The major argument we get from the opening government is that, in fact, let me rephrase the motion for you. We are not just talking about, it was emphasized that we are making room we are making sure that the dominant norm is where it is acceptable to talk about sexual interest and advances with adults in all contexts. Right? So what does it mean when you say in all contexts? It means we are emphasizing that whatever follows applies in all situations and circumstances. And when we talk about dominant norm, we are talking that we are making this talk an everyday topic. Okay? So we are not just emphasizing, we are not emphasizing on the things that you added to the motion, but we are talking about sex, sexual interest, and sexual advances in all contexts. Okay? So the best seat that we were given by our country to talk about sex was through peer education. As adults in universities, we were given these NGOs that give us the permission to talk about to do peer education, in which we teach our peers about sex. Right? That's the most comfortable seat that we were given. Of which we know that in our culture, in the Zimbabwean culture, right, these cultures, they have varying attitudes, right, towards sexuality, imposing a universal norm of open sexual discussions in all contexts, right? So that's exactly why in the Shona culture, you date privately only to tell your parents of your relation with your partner when you are ready for marriage, okay? And then when we talk about, you may say that the other countries have been able to implement sexual education, in which it's an environment that everyone can talk about, everyone can talk about sex, especially, let's say, in America, where more than 34 states have implemented sexual education. But then we can't do the same because of these cultures that we have, because those things, that they do not eliminate the fact that we are African and we have African cultures and customs, right? And then we also talk about how this impacts professional environments, right? This motion basically says that you prefer an environment where I can literally tell my service provider that I want sex from you. This means that I can imply sex to our service provider, and that was the thing that we're being corrected about just yesterday, right? So I'm saying that in professional settings, right, encouraging open discussions about sex and sexual interest may lead to distractions. They may lead to discomfort. They may even lead to legal liability. Such topics are often considered inappropriate and unprofessional in the workplace environments rejected. Maintaining professional boundaries, right, ensures a respectful and inclusive work inclusive work environment which requires sensitivity to the diverse backgrounds and comfort levels of employees, which may not align with the blanket of sexual discussions in all concepts. With this, I yield the floor.
The Deputy Leader of Opposition has stated her case. Let's hear what the Member of Government has to say.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I've got to say I'm quite disappointed at the rigidity of the mind of the opposition here today, where we are saying that they are not lucid enough and flexible enough to understand the change that comes with the time. Maybe let's reflect on the points that they raised here today in their rigid way or rigid approach at this topic here today. They mentioned that where sex is norm and dominant, there are many disadvantages. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not know of a time or a place where sex is norm and dominant. So I do not know where from which reference they know and understand that there are many disadvantages in this. So we can now understand that these are malicious allegations that cannot be proven whatsoever and can be regarded as lies. So ladies and gentlemen, moving on forward, they say that self-respect is lost when one talks about sex. This implies that sex is embarrassing. Sex is not morally upright, which, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the stigmas that we are trying to focus on here today, or trying to curb, as to say that we need to talk more about these issues, lest they are regarded as abnormal or abnormal, right? They also suggested the use of awareness campaigns, which are not as efficient, because we are here today and there's exacerbated growth in issues about STIs, in issues about sexual assault, in issues about sexual abuse. So here, ladies and gentlemen, we get to see that the approaches that we have and the approaches that they're suggesting are not really working as much. And we are coming here with a new and innovative way of looking at the sex question, right? He also mentioned a word which was an example, but was also a representation of the rigidity of cultural norms and stigma and discrimination that comes along with one talking about sex. He used the word horse, which definitely defines a woman in a way that is not appreciated by society and is unbecoming as an individual, right? So he said that more unwanted pregnancies are gotten from talking about sex. That's also a malicious allegation that cannot be proven, because we do not talk about sex as much, but we still are having all of these pregnancies, all of these teenage pregnancies and unwanted pregnancies that we talk about. He said that sex is not all about, he was talking and referring to sex as something that is about women asking for it. He was, the opposition was mentioning women asking for sex, women asking for sex, as though they are the only ones who are in the sex question, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like us to look at this in a lucid way and a lucid approach that appreciates that there is more to sex than just the gender question. There's more to this topic than just what women can do. So in advancing our points, we get to realize that talking openly about these things gives an allowance for adults to control the narrative. We are saying that these adolescents do not know much about what is happening, so they have to ask. More so, promiscuity is reduced. I mean, if we have sex as something that is sacred, obviously an adolescent person will always want to be promiscuous and try something, right? So moving on, we are saying this revives cultural prolifics, where we are saying there's a presentation of or a platform where adolescents can talk to their elderly and learn about these things. So we are resuscitating the cultural norms and values of our traditional society. Also, this allows for moral uprightness. We are saying that if somebody knows about these things and it is not as shameful as we make it to be, they know how to be responsible in it and they know how to carry themselves out. So it lessens risk of sex-related mortality. We are saying that if you do know about these things and you are not ashamed to say, no, I have a sexual problem, I have this problem, you can get the help that you need without fear of stigma. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
The Member of Government has spoken, and now we leave the floor open for the Member of Opposition.
power imbalances, open sex-related dialogues. In a world riddled with power imbalances, are we blind to the reality of abuse and exploitation? Ladies and gentlemen, this motion is dangerous and it throws the abuse open doors for predators, clogged in the disguise of open communication of pregnancy and sex, and to the vulnerables. I would like to appreciate the argument that was brought forward by the opening government, but unfortunately, they're only talking about sex education. Well, would like to bring forth into light the state that this motion is dangerous. Zimbabwe is not only a monolith. We are a tapestry of culture. Each has its own and values and beliefs. We cannot take what is from American countries and bring it into African countries, as we have our own values and beliefs. We can't impose on one-size-fits-all approach, more unwanted sex, and access and excessive to inaccurate conversation. We also talk about harassment, we talk about boundaries, but can open dialogue and sex but an open dialogue can blur the boundaries. Receiving unqualified advice guidance without proper expectations and qualification on open sex dialogue leads to undistinct advice and harm. What am I talking about? We are talking about strangers, and also there are no age restriction when it comes to issues that have to talk about sex and sexual interests, which means even the underage are at risk if they have to hear this information, and unwanted pregnancies are going to rise and rise again. Where are these children going to find the supply for food when you already have an economy that is in shambles, and you are supporting the notion that people should have open dialogue about sex, my fellow panel? When we encourage people to have open invited conversation about sex, it means that we are raising interests and urges to have sex to these fellow pairs, as they are the ones with the organs. You are talking about them about sex, which means you're allowing an opportunity to violate our cultural beliefs, whereby we are saying a woman should cover her body. So it means if we have an open dialogue conversation about sex, it means that we have opportunities whereby a boss can actually ask the employer to open up and show him her private parts, because it's an open dialogue and no restrictions are there. Are we going to have a world where we can literally open even in a car so that the driver say that I want to see your thighs and you show them? Is this the world that we want to have, my fellow colleagues? Is the question. Proceeding I would like to comment on what you talked about empower stigmatization. Well, as much as I believe, as you empower stigmatization, you are actually going to do it at an expense of other important things that we need to protect in the world. We need to protect ourselves from STIs. We need to protect ourselves. We need respect. How is a parent going to control a fellow child on certain things like drug abuse and other things when they can openly talk about sex, my fellow colleagues?
Point of
denied.
information.
I would like to proceed. As a child, as one should, but a sexual stimulus to start in the community. We have sexual organs and we're getting information. It's possible that the desires might rise. Imagine a person is watching pornography. No one has told him about anything, but from just watching, a person's urges are risen. What about talking about it to a person who can literally do it now and then? My fellow colleagues, I'm talking about thank you.
And that was the member of opposition stating her case. Now we'll leave the floor open to the government whip.
As we have discussed a vital issue, creating a world where open conversations about sex, sexual interests and advances are the norm. We, the government, firmly believe that this world is not only desirable, but also essential for a healthier and more inclusive society. As the opposition has urged that such openness would have led to many pregnancies, He said it leads to discomfort, objection, harassment, and lead to being called a whore. I quote. But we accounted that these concerns stem from the very taboo and stigma we use to aim to dismantle. And to dismantle this, I think we can move on to adopt the breaking down harmful gender stereotypes and shame. Here we're talking about that if we do that, well, we're trying to limit the people who say that if I'm talking about sex, like I'm being loose. No, I'm not loose, but I'm trying to learn as a child, as a woman, as a boy, as a girl, you see. Also, we promote the enthusiastic consent and healthy relationships. As we say that experience is the best teacher. So basically here we're talking to adults who have lived before us. I believe that if we talk about sex with them, about our sex relations, about the advances, we may grow and engage in more safer relationships.
Points of information.
Rejected. Also, it reduces the sexual violation and also exploitation. We may also encourage education and awareness to those who are ignorant, who do not know anything about sex. If I'm saying that we have got kids who are in primary school, I believe nowadays we should call the 2000s. We now engage sex as early as 13, as 12, as 10, and that's primary stage.
POI?
Rejected. And we can also foster inclusivity for the marginalized communities. Also, this debate shouldn't be only about opening up issues of talking about sex, but we should go an extra mile in having intentional work to employ an open approach at life concerning issues such as sex education and also communication. Also, we engage in having sex talks. It also promotes that when you get other people's opinions and point of views, we can limit to what we are now fighting as a world, like at large, which is the gender-based violence. I think rejected. So I think the aim and focus here today is saying that we are trying to build a nation. And the tomorrow that is free from the abuses, though we may not end them magically the next day and all, but I believe that through engaging in these topics and talking about sex, sex life, sex relations, the advances done to us by different parties, which can be female or male, we may one day fight them. With this, I thank you.
The government whip has spoken. Now, let's hear what the closing opposition whip has to say.
A good afternoon to you all. As you all know, the motion reads, this House prefers a world where the dominant norm is one where it is acceptable to talk about sex, sexual interest, and advances in all contexts, e.g., strangers, friends. And I'm going to emphasize strangers, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, strangers. We have to understand where one can be harassed by not only someone who he or she knows, but by this so-called stranger. These strangers may be and are certain individuals who would not know and can still impact and have a negative impact on our lives. Also, in regards to what sex has also been defined as, it has also been defined as not only talking about intercourse itself, but also talking about sexual expression, whereby one defines his or her own gender as being lesbian, gay, or whatever he wants. But this issue has been actually quite sensitive, and as it has portrayed itself as people within society having different notions or ideologies towards it. As each and every individual, by bringing this into context within our culture, it will bring about conflict. Gentlemen, do we really want conflict on sex issues? No, it is not something we would consider at this moment because we have other things to talk about, gentlemen. Making it the dominant norm wouldn't be something we would prefer at this moment. As my fellow colleague mentioned, she talked about predators. As we all know, certain individuals can pretend to be people who want to teach you and talk about certain things. But do we really know their real intentions? No, we might not know them. These individuals might take advantage of one's curiosity. A child might be curious to learn, and an individual will take advantage of this. Also, moving on, by looking into the issue of into the issue of dignity. Yes, gentlemen, sex it dismisses dignity of a young one, and not imagine me being a 20-year-old talking about sex with my mother. Mother, I've had sex. Would that be a normal thing? No, gentlemen, it is not normal. Within our culture, no one will accept that. Even each and every individual in my family will never accept that. Also, as we also mentioned, yes, yes, within our culture, there are certain things that we have. Yes, it is quite necessary to talk about sex, but making the dominant norm isn't what we need. Yes, we can talk about reproductive health and sexual reproductive health within certain sectors. As my fellow colleagues mentioned, we have certain organizations that provide certain spaces for us to talk about those kind of issues. And maximizing or using those spaces is really vital to our society. But not making it the dominant norm, ladies and gentlemen. Dominant, are we sure about that? This is not something we would want. And moving on, as my fellow colleague also mentioned, by having sex, it will not only increase harassment within society, but also it might increase STIs, unwanted pregnancies. Imagine, right now, we all say ignorance is bliss, but imagine a child who doesn't know about sex and is now taught about it. Do you think he would just sit around and say, oh, sex? No, gentlemen, he would want to engage. He has curiosity. Yes, and also moving on, we have how certain things such as accepting diversity in our society is quite important. But gentlemen, diversity does not come with sex. Let's talk about that and make that sure. Diversity includes certain things, but when one expresses his or her own sexual experiences and interests, it becomes a problematic situation within our cultural context. With this, I say thank you.
The motion has been stated, the speakers have debated, and now we'll leave this time to the judges to deliberate.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for that lovely debate. We had a great time as adjudicators. What I'll do is give the call first and then the general feedback on our deliberations. So unanimously, we gave first to closing opposition. We gave second to opening government. We gave third to closing government, and then we gave fourth to Gwanda State University. And these are the justifications. So firstly, on the team that gets fourth, which is opening opposition. So firstly, we thought that the bulk of your argumentation was A, not contested in the debate. I think what you failed to do in the debate is to prove why exclusively your arguments are not mutually exclusive of anything else. I think you're called out throughout the whole debate, right? They say, in your world, you had to show us why there are no unwanted pregnancies right now in a world where people don't talk about sex, why there are lesser STI right now in a world where people don't talk about sex. You also failed to show us why you're most likely, we thought that as a panel there was a lot of logic conclusion gap that you make in your speeches. So the logic is, we think that you have less STIs, we think that you have less pregnancies, we think that you are bound to cross boundaries, we think that you create a slippery slope for harassment, right? We don't think you provide enough analysis to show why specifically that comes in a world where people talk about sex and does not mutually happen in a world where that conversation about sex does not happen. You are called out earlier in CO speech when they say, well, the precedence right now is that kids don't talk with their parents about sex anyways, but we still have STIs, we still have unwanted pregnancies, we still have people raping individuals, we still have harassment. So we thought as a panel that the missing analysis from your speeches is to prove why exclusively talking about sex is something
something that will bring about the harms that you identify in a debate. So it was easy for anyone to win that debate in a world where they can easily prove that these things exist anyways in status quo. So we thought that you ought to have done a little bit more to show why exclusively in your world you are likely to get the harms that you talk about. The second thing that we hear about you is the idea of self-respect and why culturally sex is damning to talk about, right? You're also called out very early in the debate by both teams in government when they say that's exactly why we're having the debate right now. We're having the debate right now because talking about sex is taboo. What you failed to show in the debate is to prove why it should remain that way as taboo, because also on your harms that you identify, you failed to exclusively show why it doesn't happen anyways in a world where those conversations don't happen either way. So it was difficult for us to place you above any other team in the debate because we thought that most of your arguments could be argued anyways by any other team that was in government that still argues for the exact same conclusions because your logic fails to match up to that particularly, right? Let's talk about the team that gets third and why we don't think you can rank above the both teams. Firstly, your extension was very, very derivative from the ideas that we get from closing opposition. Let's look at what you talk about. You say, we think that firstly, we thought that you were arguing a little bit of extremes because you are called out by both government teams that we don't think that people necessarily are crossing boundaries. For example, your example is that you'd have bosses asking employees to show their thighs and open legs. We thought that that was arguing it in extremes, and it was a bit unfair for both teams to try and prove that in your world, you're less likely going to have bosses asking their employees to show them thighs. So on fairness of the debate, we thought that sometimes it's important when engaging to try and not argue the debate on extremes. The worst case scenario, especially because the bulk of the analysis works directly in the middle, and we don't see how you guys prove that in your world is still possible, right? But secondly, the things that you talk about are exactly some of the conclusions that they make, right? Except for one unique point that we think separates the both teams, right? You say you create a loopholes, right, in culturally where you allow predators to therefore be able to go to minors and abuse them. That is not prioritized in your speeches or shown why we should care about it as the panel or why we think it's the most important argument, even though I bought it and do believe that in a world where it's prioritized, that's possibly where the extension could be coming from, right? To say, why is that slippery slope between the relationships and the dynamics between adults and individuals, in this sense, something that we ought to care about, and why that slippery slope is one that we can't allow to exist in any instances, right? But the bulk of your arguments also, even though better analyzed than the arguments we get from all, we still think that they make the same analysis. For example, the argument on how you blur boundaries, right? Claimed, but still not analyzed. So please pay attention when you're saying these arguments that you're not just making claims. You need to provide the analysis. You need to give the example. That makes a complete argument versus just saying you blur the boundaries and that putting in enough work to show why that analysis is something that should rank above both teams here, right? Now looking at the teams that rank second and why they couldn't rank lower, right? We'll start with the team that got first. We think that closing government does a lot of damaging response, especially to your team. They're the first team to call you out on not being mutually exclusive, right? They're the first team that tell you that you can teach boundaries. So in a world where we do teach these boundaries, are you saying that it is acceptable, therefore, to talk about sex? Zero engagement from both teams as to preemptively, but also retrospectively, as to why that is something that we can't care about as the panel, right? But also they have very lovely arguments. They say, A, the idea that sex is a taboo, the idea that you can easily call a woman on this podium a whore for simply wanting sex in itself is something that is toxic and something that is problematic. They say they prefer a world where individuals can simply express themselves even amongst their peers, and therefore that destigmatizes sex as a taboo in itself, right? But a lot of arguments also come from them. They say sex shouldn't be embarrassing. We think that when you allow conversations around sex to happen, we still get the sex education that they talk about. They say, secondly, you capacitate adults to control the narrative. Therefore, it takes away all the harms that you're talking about, because they say, in essence, when you do have young adolescents who have no clue what sex is or what they should do when they get into the bedroom, whether they should switch off the lights, you're far much more likely to get these benefits where you have adults controlling the narrative, and they think that world is a world that is better. We bought into that analysis. They say you promote enthusiastic consent. No analysis from both teams as to why we shouldn't care about that, because most of your problems are that you create a slippery slope where people can easily harass individuals. They say in their world, you're most likely to have people enthusiastically consenting to having sex because you have an open conversation about what it means to have sex with your peers. But also they say you bridge the cultural gaps that exist between the older generation and the younger generation. That is analysis that we value. We don't get analysis as to why that is harmful. I think the closest thing we get of analysis is a response from you guys when you say you create the slippery slope. Hence why I say in a world where that is analyzed, you rank very high in the debate, but you don't prioritize that also as a response, but also as an analysis. And then lastly, they say it lessens the risk of sexually related mortalities. No engagement preemptively, no engagement retrospectively as to why as a panel we shouldn't care about that. So we've got more into CEO's world where you have far less harm, more consent and more education. Why they can't rank above you? We think you make a lot of claims in your debate, right? Which they then come in and analyze. So for example, arguments on how the topic of empowerment, you don't necessarily analyze what this empowerment looks like, why is it important. It looks like they are rebutting you because they are proving that, well, it is sex and it is not sexual education, right? Even though we believe it as a panel, for your next debate, try to make sure that you exclusively show, especially the people that you're debating with, where the bulk of your analysis leads into conclusion, right? The idea on how you capacitate individuals to fit in and sexualities, we thought all those were beautiful arguments. We think that the response also in your speeches is not necessarily enough for you to engage both teams in op and still rank above a team that responds so well, but also builds up in their argumentations. All the best with a break and yeah.
That brings us to the end of our debate. Thank you to the judges and well done to the participants. This is the Speak and Solve initiative, and I am your debate mistress, Ms. Jones. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, goodbye.